Okay, I'm gonna give a brief presentation, but if anybody wants to meander their way in here. This is basically the same, almost the same presentation that I previously given to a town council work session. So we've updated with a little bit of information that we've gathered kind of as the process went on. But so just wanted to give the same presentation to everybody that's here, and then give you the opportunity to ask any questions or just make comments if you want to. We are recording this whole Q&A, and so we'll put it on the website on the Cross Timbers update page that we've created, so that kind of all that information is in one place. I wanted to also just remind everybody, in case I didn't harass you while you were outside, if you could put a sticker on the board before you leave, just to let us know how you found out about the meeting tonight, because we're just trying to kind of keep track of what's doing the best job of reaching people and letting them know about events. So we would really appreciate that. So, getting started, just to give you a recap of how we got here. So this started with the 2021 strategic planning session. Town council told staff, hey, we'd like to talk more about the cross timbers at this next strategic planning session. And during that discussion, they ultimately decided, yeah, let's go ahead and hold a work session on this too. We think this is worth further discussion. So then in November, we had a work session with town council. We kind of put together a presentation, showing them what the different options were for how development could occur in the cross timbers currently. And so walked them through that, and they came back and told us, yeah, let's go ahead and reach out to the public and get their input to see if there are any changes that we might want to make to some of these development standards for how development occurs in the cross timbers. So, all that to say also, I want to preface this by saying that the town is not looking to purchase any land in the cross timbers, and so we don't have the ability to actually develop it ourselves or say, okay, we're going to ensure it's not developed, because other people do actually own that property. So this is more just to talk about what those development standards are, or design standards are, that are associated with any new development project that would come in. And so we're wanting to get the public's input on that. I will also say, because there was some concern at the previous open house, so I wanted to clarify that, to my knowledge, there's not any interest in reducing the density in the cross timbers. It's more just to talk about the development standards for how the cross timbers can be developed, what the options are available, and kind of what those standards are that go with those different options. So this is just a list of all the things that we've done to try to get the word out about this effort. We created that CTCDD webpage. We put inserts in the Cross Timbers Gazette, an insert in utility bills, the town newsletter. We have a survey up, so if anybody has not taken the survey yet, I very much encourage you to do that. So like I said, these meetings we definitely want to hear from you, but we're trying to get all that input into the survey as well, so that we can have the same answers to all the same questions, and it gives us a better way to analyze the data. So, like I said, that survey is actually it'll shut off tomorrow night at midnight. So if you haven't taken it yet, or you have any friends that haven't taken it yet, make sure you tell them to do it before tomorrow night, because we want to make sure we get their opinions. We also put out the information boards in the different town facilities. We put out information signs about this meeting, Flower Mound TV, things on social media. We sent letters to property owners in the cross timbers. And we also sent messages through Notify Me. And so that's another thing. If you haven't already seen it, we have on one of the boards with the aerial image that's spread out all over it. On either end, we have some flyers, so it has a little scan thing. You can either scan it and go to sign up for Notify Me, or you can just fill out your information on one of those sheets. If you're very interested in what's going on in the cross timbers and you want to make sure you get notified about happenings there, we actually have a Cross Timbers Notify Me group. And so if you sign up for that, we'll send notifications if there's kind of any new things happening that impact the cross timbers. So you don't have to live in any specific place. It's just if you're interested in hearing more about that. We also have just a separate note to plug something that the town's doing to, again, try to reach more people. we've set up Notify Me services for the whole town, just for general development projects that move forward. So you can sign up for various zones or all of the zones if you want to know about all the projects that come forward. And we'll send out emails on the Friday before meetings and let you know if there's anything in the zone you've selected on an agenda, so that you know there's an opportunity for you to provide input coming up. So this is the Cross Timbers area. This is what the area that we're talking about in this discussion today. Just a history of the Cross Timbers. The Conservation Development District was first recognized in the master plan in 1999. In 2000, we codified smart growth and agricultural conservation district regulations. In 2002, we had the first agricultural conservation development, which was Chimney Rock. And then in 2013, the master plan was amended to also include cluster development as another development option within the Cross Timbers. And in 2015, we had the first single-family subdivision with cluster development standards, and that was Town Lake, formerly known as Bungoorley West. So this is just talking about the public outreach we did in the previous years, 98 to 2001, and then in 2013, because in Flower Mound, we care what our residents think, so we always go through a lot of efforts to try to reach out to people. But I'm super proud of our efforts this year because we have over 900 survey responses so far. So that is a great number. So I'm glad that we've been able to hear from so many people. Purpose of the Cross Timbers. So this is from the town's master plan. It's preserve the integrity of the Cross Timbers ecological area in central Flower Mound, protect the unique country atmosphere and natural environment, allow environmentally sensitive development to occur, and maintain overall densities of 1 unit per 2 acres with moderate increases with cluster developments or conservation techniques. So this is just a summary of the development standards depending on the different options that you're looking at in the Cross Timbers. So agricultural rural development, this has always been an option in the Cross Timbers, but so far nobody's taken us up on it. That's if it's minimum 5 acre tracts. So not to say that nobody lives on a 5 acre tract in the Cross Timbers, but you don't have a neighborhood or a whole subdivision of 5 acre tracts. And then agricultural development, that would be minimum 2 acre tracts. We have a couple of those. Agricultural conservation, that is a minimum of 1 acre tract. And the average we've seen is about 1 acre for those. The average for agricultural subdivisions that we've seen is about 2.3 acres. And then cluster development, so the minimum lot size for cluster development is a 1/2 acre. But you can't do all 1/2 acre. The ordinance requires you to have a variety of lot sizes. And what we've actually heard from developers is that it's pretty hard for them to make it work on a 1/2 acre, just because of the size of the house that tends to want to be built out there. And then when you put in the septic system, because there's no sewer in the Cross Timbers, it's kind of hard to make it work on a 1/2 acre. So what we typically see is an average of 0.7 acres for those lots. And then we have SF30 listed here, which is minimum 30,000 square foot lot, just because those are usually kind of the dimensional standards that are used with cluster developments. We usually apply SF30 standards to them. So looking at lot width, average is about 238 feet wide in agricultural, 155 in conservation, 139 in cluster. In unit size, minimum is small, but what we actually see is 6,260 in agricultural, 6,800 in conservation, 5,800 in cluster. Max lot coverage. So in agricultural, max is 25%, but what we see is more like 6.2. Agricultural conservation, max is 25, we usually see 15%. Cluster, average of 21%. And then front yard setbacks, 40 for the agricultural options, 25 is what usually is applied for cluster. Side yard, 25 for agricultural, 15 for cluster. Rear yard, 20 for agricultural, but 30 for cluster. And then the other things are pretty much the same. Now, looking at the density, that's the one thing that is different about cluster developments. Cluster is one of the few, it's really one of the only development types we have in Flower Mound where you really are able to look at an overall development density. Usually we call things density, but we really look at minimum lot size. So, for an SF 15,000 square foot lot subdivision, that's low density residential here. But we don't look at what the average density is for the whole subdivision. Each lot has to meet that minimum lot size. So Cluster is the only one that's a little different because it actually looks at an overall density for the development. So there's a minimum half acre, but like I said, most of them can't really get down to a half acre, but you have to have an overall density for your development of 1 unit per 1.6 acres. So it's just a little bit different. And you know, one thing that could potentially be nice about the cluster option, because it has some flexibility built in, is that you could have a smaller percent dedicated as open space with a larger minimum lot size. Like you could say, oh, well, we're going to have only 30% dedicated open space, but a minimum 1.5 acre lots, for instance, if that was something you wanted to pursue. Whereas there's just not really much flexibility with the other options. Like with conservation, you're going to have 50% dedication of open space no matter what. So then there's not really any incentive to pursue the more flexible option. So this is just to kind of show you what this looks like. So for agricultural development, if you start out with 100 acres, so there's going to be 0 acres that are dedicated as open space if you do agricultural development, because there's no required open space dedication, it's just 2 acre lots. And then what we've seen is about 8 acres of right-of-way. You end up with a little bit more right-of-way streets. We end up with a little bit more streets because you actually have lots that are farther away, you know, because each one is 2 acres and you have to get to all of those lots. So you end up with a little bit more acreage dedicated to streets. So you end up with only about 92 that you're going to be able to work with. So then the density ends up being 0.92 units per 2 acres. So you end up with a little bit fewer lots than you would think off the top, because you have to meet that minimum lot size of 2 acres no matter what. So you end up with you could have a maximum of 46 lots in 100 acres with a agricultural subdivision. If you look at a conservation development, basically the same thing. You actually end up with slightly less acreage for right-of-way, only 4 acres, but then you have to do the 1 unit per 2 acres still have to come up with that overall density, the same overall density, so it doesn't change the maximum number of lots, it's still 46. So with the cluster development option, you go through 100 acres, 50% open space. Now, and again, technically, cluster development option doesn't require you to dedicate 50% open space. That's almost always, I think that's what we've seen for all of them, because that's always what staff has told applicants is the expectation in town, is that you'll dedicate at least 50% of open space. But that's not a requirement per the code. So that's why I was saying, you know, you might, because of the flexibility, you could have less open space but larger lots, or anyway. But so typically we see the 50 acres would be dedicated in open space in that situation. And then 5 acres of right-of-way, so a little bit more than the conservation development. Minimum lot size of ½ acre. So if you just went at the lot size, you could have 90 lots, but then you can't because you have to meet that 1 unit per 1.6 acres. So based on applying that overall density, you end up with 62 lots is the maximum you can have. But it's still quite a number more than you could have with conservation or agricultural development. And this was just, at the last open house, we had people kind of ask how many cluster or conservation developments have been approved in town and where they were. So we just put those on there. We have Montesino is 1, that was conservation. Pepper Creek Ranch is number 2, that was a cluster. Chimney Rock, number 3, that's a conservation. 4, High Meadow, conservation. 5 was Hillside, which is cluster. 6, Town Lake, cluster. And 7, Town Lake East, which was also a cluster. So that shows you where all of those are located within the cross timbers. So open space, what's included in open space? Within agricultural conservation, we say there is a hard line minimum of 50% of the project's area has to be dedicated open space, and it has to be held in a conservation easement by a qualified nonprofit entity. The open space can and should include significant natural features, floodplain, native trees, substantial, anyway, all of your beautiful natural environmental areas should go into it. But like I said, it's a hard line at 50%, and then like it also has to be dedicated in a conservation easement to a nonprofit entity. So that's something else that's been discussed, some with council as this came forward, is if that's something that should be considered being adjusted, or at least adjust how it's done, because how it's happened so far, it's gone into these conservation easements, but it's not been accessible to the public. It's really just a benefit or feature to that neighborhood. And so there have been some questions from council about that, and should this be more accessible? Now, a difference with cluster development, I think you still will see the same thing, same kind of environmental features you would expect to go into that open space, but recreational uses are also allowed, and there's an allowance for it to be maintained by or managed by the HOA or the town. So it creates the opportunity for someone to dedicate it as parkland and give it to the town, which isn't really an option through conservation. Or also, like I said, just maintain it by the HOA. And whether you put a public access easement on it or not, that is an option. But so land availability, this is just to kind of show you what's still out there in the cross timbers. So the red is developed, the kind of hatched area. Those are 2 active applications. And then the green is land that has been conserved through various developments. So shows you what's already out there. It doesn't seem like a ton of land, although I will say it's a small picture, but it's actually many, many acres. Environmentally sensitive areas, this is just to talk about kind of some of what might be included as an environmental feature within these areas. Water impoundments, this is kind of just any like body of water out there that's a ½ acre or larger. Upland habitat, 10-acre minimum tracts of land, with at least 50 trees per acre. Heavily treed properties and specimen trees. You also might have slopes, could have streams, various things like that. And so just to talk a little bit about some of the protections the town has in place if an applicant does want to impact natural features. So if slopes are identified that exceed 12%, then that is something that we'd have to request a slope exception from town council. So it's exceed 12%, or it's also if you're between 5 and 12%, but you impact more than 5 feet away from a structure. So basically it's like, if you want to just put your house right here and it's impacting slopes between 5 to 12%, that's fine. You can do that without asking for special permission, and then up to 5 feet. So basically you have to put in a retaining wall maybe at that 5-foot point. So you can't just mass grade it. You can't just grade the whole thing out and make it a flat lot. So that's when the 5 to 12% would also require an exception. Then also water impoundment, waters of the state, waters of the US, anything with water. Especially if it's larger than, like I said, a ½ acre, then you would need an exception. If it's waters of the US, you would maybe have to go through a Clean Water Act permit. If it's floodplain, you have to get an exception. And then you also kind of have to go through the whole FEMA process to impact floodplain. Then there's also upland habitat. Now, so with some of our just habitats, which are treed areas, you do not have to get exceptions to impact those, but you do have to pay into the town's tree mitigation fund.
Where does that go?
So financial incentives, there are some incentives in place for an applicant to do a conservation development. Land within a conservation element can be conservation easement may be eligible for a property tax reduction if it's determined to be a special or unique area. So that's not something, the determination that the town makes. This is not a tax benefit that the town personally provides, but it is something that's just available out there. Because if you are going to conserve a large area of land, then that's something, an area that could potentially be exempt or get a tax break. So the incentives that are offered by the town, we offer the possibility of expedited development review, permit fee waivers, reduced street infrastructure requirements, although that's really just because basically you need less streets. So it's saying, well, it will cost you less because you won't have to build as much streets, so you get to save some money on that. Up to and including 50% reduction in parkland dedication requirements, and then the reduction of monetary assessments related to agricultural rollback taxes, but again, that's not something that the town has control over. That's something they'd have to talk to the county about. So the main one that the town can really provide is this up to and including 50% reduction in parkland dedication requirements. So for parkland dedication, the town, this is a standard that applies to everybody, any new residential development, parkland dedication requirement of 3.36 acres for every 100 single-family dwellings. I should say any single-family development. For every 100 single-family dwellings or fraction thereof, and you can't count land in floodplain or floodway to meet those requirements. And so, honestly, what you tend to see with these cluster or conservation or agricultural developments, you're not going to have a ton of parkland that's required because you don't usually have a whole lot of lots because you're usually looking at a density that's around 1 unit per 2 acres. So you would have to have a pretty giant amount of land for it to end up being a significant amount of acreage that's required to be dedicated. So a lot of times that is a situation where the town would accept fees in lieu of parkland dedication, because usually if the amount of dedication that's required is less than 5 acres, then the town doesn't necessarily want to take it as land. They might want to take it as fees so that they can kind of save up money to buy a larger tract of land somewhere else. So the other considerations to think about with parkland dedication, calculating parkland dedication and open space. Again, we kind of talked about that, whether we would want any parkland to be actually part of that open space dedication and be accessible to the public. The restrictions on floodplain, that you can't currently dedicate floodplain as parkland. Sometimes people can do kind of cool stuff with floodplain, especially if it's around beautiful water feature, that sort of thing, and so you might want to have trails around it, or so it's just a question of whether that's anything to consider. And then also ADA accessible walkways and trails. That's something else, just a question that kind of comes up, because sometimes you have these really beautiful natural environmental areas. It's just a question of how much you want to impact that as far as trying to build like a true concrete trail that meets all accessibility requirements, which is something that we want to do because we want areas to be accessible to everyone, but then you just end up impacting the environment more. And so it's kind of like, is there any kind of middle ground there where you can have some trails that are more natural trails and then others that are accessible. So I'm almost done, getting to the end. Conservation easements or residential lots. This is just to go back through some of the kind of pros and cons we talked about. Generally, if you have larger 2-acre lots, there's no conservation, no requirement that trees or environmental areas be conserved on a property. So not to say that everyone won't do that. I think what we have been fortunate, what we've seen in Flower Mound, is that most people that are living on larger lots have conserved a lot of that beautiful acreage that they have, but the town just doesn't have the ability to make them. So, it's their property and they can kind of do with it what they will. The larger lots do end up requiring more pavement or streets to get to them. They tend to be developed with larger septic systems, just because they have more land to work with, so they can. It's cheaper to have a larger septic system. You have to make it smaller to make it fit on the smaller lots. And it's always more expensive to make things smaller. It seems like that shouldn't be the case, but provides for more. Now the benefit to doing larger 2-acre lots, I think one of them anyway, provides for more private agricultural options. If that's really an intent and something that we want to ensure remains in Flower Mound, you don't really have the opportunity to have your own barn or that sort of thing on a lot that ends up being 0.7 acres. That's just not really feasible necessarily. And then more trees and natural elements are technically preserved or protected with conservation. So this was something that came up at the last open house, so I was just going to mention it. And it's definitely something we'll look into as we go forward to council with future suggestions and results of this survey and outreach. Was street lighting. There were a lot of questions at the last meeting about street lighting. Some people felt like some of the newer developments in the cross timbers were very bright, very lit up, and wondered what standards are they meeting, or is it the same standards that I have? And so I think it just depends. If you have older subdivisions, then they would not have been constructed under the same street light standards that are in place today. So today, street lighting on public streets is paid by the town, private streets by the developer. Our Flower Mound standards do require street lights be installed at all intersections, cul-de-sacs, any significant curb and mid-block on streets longer than 600 feet. But typically developers install standard lighting offered by Encore or CoServe. But again, if this is a concern in the cross timbers, I think that is a possibility, something that could be looked into, of whether we come up with a specific street lighting standard in cross timbers that uses more, cutoff or shielded lights or that sort of thing. So what's next? What comes after this? We're going to start having work sessions. So we have the first work session with the Planning and Zoning Commission on March 28th, and we're going to have a work session with the Environmental Conservation Commission on April 5th. The Environmental Conservation Commission, they review open space management plans that always have to be associated with either cluster or conservation developments. So we're going to get their feedback on those open space management plans. We'll go to the Parks Board on April 7th for a work session. Because again, this sometimes impacts the Parks Department if people through cluster developments or dedicating open space as parkland. And then to Town Council on April 21st. So we'll kind of bring all the information we've gathered up to this point to Town Council on April 21st. And then depending on feedback and kind of direction we get to Town Council, then we'll potentially schedule something for public hearings if there are any amendments to current regulations that come out of that. So that's it for my presentation. I would be happy to answer any questions, or if you can just come and talk if you want to.
I just have a question. You're meeting with the planning and zoning before the conservation. So are you making your plans with the planning before you find out the conservation's input on how you're going to zone things and plan them?
So it's all just work sessions, so it's still going to go back to the Planning and Zoning Commission. If there's an actual regulation or master plan amendment, it'll go back to the Planning and Zoning Commission for public hearing. So it's kind of like we're starting with the Planning and Zoning Commission and getting their feedback, and then the Conservation Commission's feedback, and then Parks' feedback, and then we're going to go back to the Planning and Zoning Commission with, okay, we started with you, this is more we learned, and here's where we are now.
Okay, thanks.
Question. So in one of your slides, you showed that there are a number of developments that have already been approved, either through cluster or conservation. And you mentioned that there is really no strict requirements about requiring 50% for cluster homes for open space. Even though in general, it sounds like there could be, in general, there are 50%. Have we actually done that and did some calculation and look at the real numbers that these applications that have already been approved, are they really at the 50% mark, or what percentage, what's the real number? Have we looked back?
Yes, they've all been at 50%. So that's what we have told all the applicants, that that would be the expectation, is 50%, and everyone has met that so far.
Yeah, I voiced the same concern. I lived in the cross country for 32 years, back in 2013 when they were first doing the cluster developments. And we've had some terrific cluster developments who've done a very good job, like the Toll Brothers ones especially, that they did, and really took good care of the environment. But as we're starting to see more and more of these on larger developments, I really I'm concerned about the density. What is happening is they take the number of acres, they divide it by 1.6. That's how many lots you're going to put in there, regardless of where you need to do the conservation or not Toll Brothers, but some of them have. And that's my biggest concern. You said something about density. My argument all along is we shouldn't have done 1.6. Any increase in density should all be incentive-based. It should be based on this performance for the town, this benefit for the area, this benefit, and each benefit you get an increase in density. So.
For the cluster developments, where would the schools go? Where are they going to be built? Or I know there's LISD land somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
How do you take that into consideration?
Yes, they're all of these children get to go to school, I promise. But we actually notify LISD anytime there's new zoning applications that come in to make sure that they're aware of it and they have the opportunity to let us know if they have any concerns about being able to meet that capacity. But they have not said they had any concerns to this point, so they have been able to accommodate all of the school children. I'm not sure if it's still the case. At one point, in talking to the school district, they actually had somewhat of a reduction in capacity, or not capacity, I guess, in attendance. And so, so I don't think it is a concern at this point.
So Lexington, can you explain on the conservation, Chimney Rock, Montecino, the challenges of the land trust? You know, it's in the ordinance that it has to be a nonprofit land trust, and they have to be willing to accept the environmental features. And so what has the town done to help the property owners out in the conservation to incentivize doing that, as opposed to just doing 2-acre lots? Because, you know, when it was created to do that. It's very hard. The town hasn't set up a land trust, but you require it to be a land trust. So when we talked about it in 2013, the cluster development with the HOA taking over the ownership, having some, you got the Montecino. If you live in Montecino, it's a conservation district. It's run by Conemaire, so is Chimney Rock. The residents aren't allowed to be in there. You don't go, you back up to it, you can clean 5 foot away from your fence, but you just look at the trees behind you, and it's maintained by a land trust in perpetuity. The town didn't set up one. It's becoming extremely difficult. If you own a piece of property like Sam Wilson or Charlie Cummings that doesn't have a whole lot of environmental features, you're not going to get Conemaire, and there's nobody else. Believe me, we went to every land trust there was, and nobody wants to take on that. So, you know, when we opened up this public hearing back in 2013, that was the option. Either it's not going to be conservation. I mean, there hasn't been one conservation one done after. We did High Meadow, we designed Montecino, and Chimney Rock was the first one, like you said. But there was nobody else. So the only option the Wilsons, the Smiths, the Cummings, the First have is just to divide it all up into 2-acre lots. That's not conserving anything. That's not conserving trees. I mean, you just for all the reasons, you can have open space. So there's got to be a compromise. I mean, you either got to change what the conservation ordinance was and allow for some flexibility in it, or the other option was the cluster. And you can see that ever since it was there, all the rest of them are clustered. They still say 50% open space, but they're maintained by the homeowners association because you can't get a land trust to come in and manage it. And they do provide options for trails. If anybody goes out to Pepper Creek, which is the latest one, it's 100 acres, it's 50 lots, and it preserved the escarpment. It did exactly what the ordinance was put in. I mean, it's no more density than you would if you would have done the conservation. It's no more density if you had cut it up in 2-acre lots. I mean, I think the cluster is a great option given what we're trying to do in the conservation part of town, the Cross Timbers conservation part of town. I mean, it's worked well, and it's been done very tastefully. And, you know, maybe there's some tweaks and some input, but public open space.
Well, I think that's great feedback, that, you know, that's a concern with utilizing the conservation development, that, you know, it's limited in how it can be maintained, and there's kind of limited options of nonprofit agencies that are now willing to take that land on, and how even the people that live in that neighborhood can benefit from it. So I think that's good feedback.
But I think you misspoke, because you can still access some trails from Chimney Rock. There's equestrian trails. I mean, you can still access that land. You say people have to just stare at it, but it's beautiful back in there. You should try it sometime. It's really nice.
I've walked it, and there
Well, that's good feedback too.
there is equestrian trails throughout town you can walk on, but you can't walk through the conservation district. If you read the rules of how they maintain them, go visit Conemaire and see if you can walk through it off of the equestrian trail.
But I mean, we did visit Conemaire, Chimney Rock, and we were able to plant milkweed plants in there.
You got to go. I agree. They allow you to.
There's ways of doing that, and also I'm not trying to get rid of cluster development, because I think they can have a I'll try to take a minute. But I do think that the first and foremost thing you ought to do is looking for the best open space, the best protection of the trees, the best natural environment, all that stuff, and then figure out how many lots you put in there, and keep the tennis courts and all that stuff out of there. You don't need to allow joint across members.
I agree with you.
So, with the 2 acre lots, like what are the rules for animals for new developments? If I get it, in these different neighborhoods, can I have the cow in the backyard and my horses in the backyard?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
In our agricultural zoning, you can definitely keep animals. Other people? Questions? Comments?
I'm here tonight to represent the Smith family on the property they own on 1171 in Shiloh, the southeast corner. And we have been a part of Flower Mound for close to 60 years. And we've seen Flower Mound become the community that it is today. And we as a family really think Flower Mound has thoughtfully and considerately transformed Flower Mound into the community that it is today. In 2013, Flower Mound undertook the comprehensive review of the master plan. And in that review, it was discussed many times. I think there was like 18 meetings, but the 2 or 3 key takeaways that we got were, number one, the least effective way to preserve open space and trees was to allow large tracts of land to be divided into 2 acre lots. That would allow property owners to potentially cut down trees with 0 penalties, but of course specimen trees were excluded. Number 2, that the quality of open space matters as much as the quantity. It allows greater expansion of natural habitat and across timbers. Reversing cluster zoning back into 2 acre lots, you lose control of the preservation of trees. You lose the quality and quantity of open space. You lose the integrity of the land. We also believe cluster zoning has had the ability to draw in quality builders and developers who are able to aesthetically enhance the homes to complement the open space. The homes are done with the highest quality and purposely allows open space to be the center of attraction. The cluster zoning concept in Flower Mound has become the poster child for many communities in Texas and elsewhere because it has demonstrated how cluster development can really enhance the community. I do believe Flower Mound should be proud of the wisdom and leadership in the past. I hope the current leadership and community will stay the course. It has truly been a success story for Flower Mound. The Smith family firmly believes the highest and best use of the land is cluster zoning. It has proven to be a successful plan for preservation of green and trees.
Thank you. Anybody else have comments? Questions?
My question is, when I did the survey, and I really looked at the different maps of the plans, the original plan that has half developed and half undeveloped looked, that's how it's been, and I've lived here for over 25 years. The other 2 plans, they're drawn better and they look more attractive when you just look at them as a map. However, it looks to me, in comparing all 3 very carefully, that if you go to the cluster plan, I assume that's what the other 2 are.
One was conservation, one was cluster.
Okay. I found the cluster plan and the conservation plan to lead to higher density of houses and less density of open space and natural space for animals, wildlife, and I read also in the survey that the additional 2 plans that we're talking about, builders are offering the town incentives to approve those. And I worry about that because part of the reason I moved to Flower Mound was because it wasn't like every other subdevelopment in the Metroplex. And I've watched it go away from that over the years. Now, I live right near Grapevine Lake. I've ridden on the riding trails. I've walked on the riding trails extensively over all these years. And I worry, in fact, at the last town meeting I came to, I think the name of the development is Deer Run, and a lot of the community came here to protest the development that's going on there because an environmental study wasn't done on it before the plans were drawn up. And their point, and they had an environmentalist speak at that meeting. He went over the fact that if the lake is high, it's going to that development will cut off access for herds of deer. You know, if the floodplain gets water in it, it is going to cut off the habitat for wildlife. And I wrote to one of the town councilmen after the meeting. I came for a different purpose, but it was really interesting hearing all that. And I said, is there any, because a lot of people spoke out against that development. And I said, can this get any traction from this meeting? And he wrote back to me that, no, the town will not do anything about it because the permits have already been granted. And if the town disavowed it, they would be sued by the builders. And that worried me. Okay.
There was a lot in there. Let me answer some of your questions. So, I think when you talk about seeing the different plans and like the agricultural versus the other, and there seems more density. So with the cluster, there is a little bit more density because it's 1 per 1.6 as opposed to 1 per 1.6 acre as opposed to 1 per 2 acre. But I think what you're seeing more is that the lots are grouped closer together in both of them. So it's not necessarily that it's more dense. Like I said, in the case of the conservation, it's not. It's exactly the same overall density. It's just that you might have, they're 1 acre lots instead of 2 acre lots, and so you might have them kind of closer together and have an area over here that's open space.
More open.
That area is all just like dedicated as open space for either for the community or for in a conservation easement, but which also could be accessed by the community through trails. But so it's just done a little bit differently. There's not a huge difference even when you go to cluster. Like I said, it's 1 per 1.6 instead of 1.2 or 1 per 2. The difference is more, I think, that the lots are clustered together as per the name. And so that might be your feedback that you don't like that as much, that you would rather it have more of an open space look. And I know that was one question that I heard at council was kind of questioned about, you know, well, could we make it to where the more of the lots have access to the, or, you know, front on the open space, or, you know, so it's not so much like a regular neighborhood and open space, but have it more integrated. So it's possible that that might be kind of where you're going also. We'll get back to you in just a second. So I know that was the stuff you said earlier on. Now for the estuary point, I think is the development you were talking about. So they did have to do an environmental review. Like I said, when I was talking about earlier, the town does an environmental site assessment for all the projects that come forward. And so based on that, then we required the developer to do an environmental protection plan. So they did have to go through and identify these environmental features. And I'll tell you that for flooding and for things like that, now sometimes the more detailed plan isn't done until the time of like platting, when they are actually having to do the engineering work. So sometimes we don't know all the details yet at that point, but we do check on them. So I don't want you to feel that it's just getting overlooked or not being considered. Sometimes, like I said, we might not have all the information if it's early on, because kind of early in the process, they might just be drawing boxes. Yeah, we want to put lots here, here, and here, but if they haven't done all of the engineering yet, they might not know for certain kind of what the topography is there, or what, you know, if they're really where the floodplain exactly is. Like, they don't have all the specifics yet. So we do a high-level review early on, but we definitely do a more detailed review later on. But now, all that to say, if they do meet all of the town's environmental standards, then they are able to, you know, plat their land and develop it. But it wasn't that, it wasn't that permits had already been issued to the builder. It was more, I think what they're saying is just that, what the councilmember was saying is that the state has regulations about being able to plat your own property, and so if you meet all of the town's regulations where your property is located in, then council can't stop them from being able to plat it to, you know, if they meet all the regulations. Oh, and you said you were concerned because builders are giving incentives to the town. So builders are not giving incentives to the town. Now, the town will sometimes give incentives to builders. Like I said, in the case of cluster conservation developments, they are able to give incentives, but they're not guaranteed. So it can be, if it is a development that the town really thinks is of high quality, that they want to incentivize. It's not that you automatically get incentives just because you do a cluster or conservation development.
Okay.
Okay, on your example, you had 100 acres, you had 2 acres for 46 lots, conservation development is 46 lots, a cluster development was 62 lots. By my count, that's 16 more rooftops in 100 acres. So we are increasing density with cluster developments. My argument is, let's make sure we get what we want when we increase density.
I understand. What do you want? What do you want to make sure we do?
I want to make sure that the post oaks and the trees protected, that we do all the natural environmental things. We're trying to protect the mission statement of what the town's all about, and we don't get the plain old look with house after house after house into it. And if that means they have to have less lots to keep them from doing that, instead of just taking that and dividing by 1.6, then they should have less lots. And that's why I thought an incentive-based program was better to go than to do a 1.6.
Okay.
Thank you, Lexon. She's done a great job, you know, keeping us informed and the overview. We really appreciate it, Lexon. And a heads up on what's going on. And they call me the bee man because, like the bumblebees or the honeybees or whatever, because I'm concerned about the environment. And I'm not anti-business, I'm pro-business, but I'm pro-life. Your life, my life, the wildlife. So this cross-timber zone that we're looking at, you know, extends from Kansas down to South Texas. And the conservation effort was started because this is an environmentally sensitive area. I'm so grateful for that. And I'm so grateful for where we are today with this. And I would say, job well done, conservation. We got wild game walking through our neighborhoods, you know, we've got birds everywhere, you know, we've got flowers, natural flowers, wildflowers. You know, if I had my way, speaking for those who can't speak, the animals, the wildlife, the bees, I would say, stop where we are. But we can't do that evidently. But I guess my point is, we see the boundaries, we see the conservation area, but you know, the air doesn't have the boundaries, the water doesn't see the boundaries, the wildlife doesn't see these boundaries, they're into other areas. I hope you're aware, and maybe Lexi can speak to it, of the 4,000 apartments just to the east of us, to the west of us that are being developed, the industrial development. You know, what's that going to do to our air, to our traffic, to our water, to our noise, to all those things that we came here for, quality of life, the brochures, the information, the Chamber of Commerce, you go on the website, you got the beautiful horse and the lady and the wildflowers, and do we want to preserve, do we want to conserve that? Do we want to preserve that? Or do we want to try to repair that? So I think there needs, so grateful again, and I think there needs to be a lot more serious discussion about what's going on. Because like I say, this very sensitive area is disappearing. And real quick, and I'll line this up, but my sister's family, her in-laws, in the 70s, drove their Rolls Royce down here from New York because it was a little crowded up there. And they had a horse farm by the lake, and they were really enjoyed it. They called it Green Acres. And when they passed away, the family gave their horse ranch to the city, and it's the Green Acres Park, and it's very it's connected with Texas A&M. It's got the pollinators, the butterflies, the bees. It's got some really educational things for the young people. Bees are 90% of the population, pollination for the seed plant. And their habitat is disappearing according to Mission Honey right here in town. So that's just one example. I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Ms. Lexon, I have just a couple of simple questions. What's really driving a change to the Conservation Development District? That's the first question. Secondly, as I look at the board up there, since 2002, that's been about 20 years, we've only had 7 new developments in that area. And all around us, things are going on. Now, I'm not saying we go out and destroy, I'm a developer and I've done a cluster development, but out of the 5 up there, 1, 2, 3, 4, I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4 up there, have we identified problems, impacts? Have they failed us?
Yes, sir.
And all that thing. So can we address some of that and what's really driving the change to the ordinance? Because it appears that over the last 20 years, without the cluster development, we wouldn't have any development out there.
We don't want it.
Yeah, we don't
But that's kind
That's why we need
of,
it out there.
but that's kind of illegal at the end of the day, not wanting.
So, as far as what's driving it, you said what's driving a change to the ordinance. So I don't think any specific change to the ordinance has been identified at this point. During the original discussion with council, there were some questions of, are these development standards really meeting our expectations, and could we improve them? And so I think that's the purpose of this is, could we improve those standards? There's nothing wrong with revisiting plans or standards. It's something that typically you do every, 5 or 10 years. And so at this point, we're reviewing this. But I don't think there's any foregone conclusion that we're trying to, we need to make this change and what drove that change. I know at least for me, at this point, it's just trying to get that impact from the public of what are your thoughts? Are there changes that you would like to see or concerns that you have? And we will bring that information to council and let them decide what they want to do with that.
So you guys are trying to conserve trees and land and trying to make this great, but you're adding more cars. You're adding more people, you're adding more construction vehicles. This isn't just gonna happen in a year. This is gonna be in several years. This is gonna go on. So what are you gonna do with our infrastructure then? So then we're gonna have to widen the roads. We're gonna have to build more grocery stores. There are no grocery stores for anybody to really shop at around here, really, especially on Cummings. So we're so worried about the land, but why aren't you guys worried about the environment and the impact of the air quality that's going to impact us? That's why we moved out here. It's quiet. We can breathe, we can relax out here. So tell me about what you guys plan on doing about that. The infrastructure part, and you're trying to keep everything clean and open and trees, but now you're polluting our air and everything more.
So for the infrastructure, for any new development that comes in, that is something that's looked at, whether it's going to generate enough traffic to actually trigger a traffic impact analysis. And so then that study to determine, do roads need to be widened, do they need to be improved, how do we ensure that it serves the people around them, or serves the new people, the new residents that we would be potentially welcoming to Flower Mound. Now, we do not specifically have any air quality standards at the town level. TCEQ monitors air quality at the state level, and so I know that they have standards that they enforce, whether it's on vehicle emissions or that sort of thing. But so I would say we try to ensure that the infrastructure will be there for any new development that occurs. And like I said, it's definitely something that the town looks at to make sure that, you're right, there may be some streets that need to be widened, or, over time the town wants to improve the trail network through there. I know the trail master plan is going through a review process now to ensure that there's, kind of access throughout the town. So I think that the town's goal is always just, as we continue to grow, to try to meet the needs of our residents through open space, through connections, trail connections, through infrastructure, and try to parkland dedication. And so kind of we have some of these standards set up for those type of things, to, like I said, to make sure that when a new development comes in, they have to either pay fees for parkland or dedicate parkland so that the town has the ability to buy parkland in the future to meet those needs. With smart growth, there's a minimum amount of parkland that has to be available in the town per 1,000 residents before a development can even move forward. So, there's things like that we try to ensure that we're meeting the ongoing needs of residents. And then, like I said, we review it with every new project, whether it's with water, with sewer, well, not sewer in the cross timbers, but with water, with infrastructure, traffic, all that type of stuff. I don't know if that's really answers your question.
So I just want to convey my thoughts on this, and I know you're being a little bit politically correct in saying what is this for and what it's not for, but obviously there's a desire from council to remove the cluster development option, and so I think the town should always maintain as much optionality to provide different types of development, and if that includes cluster, great. And so as I look at this, I live in Wright Estates, and we're the last neighborhood on the way to Murrell Park on Simmons, and there's 18 properties in the development. 16 of them have houses. Each one is almost exactly 2 acres. And in my neighborhood, one of the 3 things that I take away from cluster development, first of all, is that cluster development helps preserve trees, helps preserve open space, and helps give a corridor for animals. And so in my neighborhood, there is not one tree in the entire 38 acres that could not be cut down tomorrow because there's no conservation. Second of all, there's not 1 square inch of open space that is not concrete or someone else's property besides my own that I can step on. So the cluster development with conservation provides that. And then finally, back in January, unfortunately, I had a deer try to jump my fence, and he didn't make it. And so in the 18 properties in my neighborhood, there's actually 14 that have fences. So one of the things, again, that the cluster development helps provide is corridors for wildlife. So that needs to be taken into consideration.
I believe that cluster developments are the best way to preserve the open spaces in Western Farm Mountain because of the requirements that Mr. Stock just mentioned with conservation. The other thing is that is often overlooked is the amount of trees that are added in a position like this. I was at the Cummings Ranch presentation last night, and although the engineer that was presented didn't have the numbers, I know there's a lot of extra trees that are added to individual lots. So people that are concerned about air quality, a majority of the large trees that are there are preserved, and then trees that are added will actually benefit the air quality. The other thing about the major roads in town, 1171 for example, I don't have the numbers in front of me. Frankly, I think the town should do a traffic study. I believe that we need to have an understanding as to where the traffic is coming from. But a 6-lane divided road like 1171, and the traffic that's on there today, I live out in Wellington, so I'm aware of what the traffic looks like, is nowhere near the capacity of a building, of a road like that the state spent so much money on. 1171 or 2499, from what I understand, is probably around 60 to 70% capacity of what the state planned it for. So, believe it or not, although we feel we're stressed about traffic in this town, again, the town needs to do a traffic study. We need to understand where we are with the capacity of the road, the investment the state's made in this town. But we have nowhere near the traffic problems that people seem to think they have. And this type of development preserves these large trees, actually adds trees to, that will in 15, 20 years, will actually add to help us with, which, I mean, Mr. Cummings, because he owns the property, I think he cut down 4, 5, 6 trees on his own a couple of years ago. He owns those trees, they're his trees. He could probably clear cut that property if he wanted to. But we all know that there's no value in that property for him to clear cut it. So when you break it down and you add the cluster and conservation requirements a cluster development adds, it actually preserves these vistas and these areas that we like. The other last thing, and I'll give the mic back, if we really want to preserve open space in this town, then let's do a bond referendum. Let's all pay for it through our property taxes. Have the town raise $15, $40, $50 million and buy the land, and then we can control it instead of us trying to control somebody else's land.
We can do that without the town, probably. We'll write you.
Thank you. To be as transparent as possible, my name is Rob Hall. I work for Toll Brothers. I'm a developer. But I've also lived in the town of Flower Mound for 21 years. I'm raising 4 kids in the school district. I've lived in 3 different homes. So yes, I'm a for-profit business, but at the same time, this is my home. And it's my family's home, and I take what I do pretty seriously. I appreciate some of the positive comments that I've heard tonight. I think we've done a good job staying within the kind of the identity of the cluster. So my question really is, why are we even talking about the cluster? And here's why. It's not an automatic right. I can't come in like Estuary Point with a plat and get the cluster option. Well, we use the word by right. I can't get it automatically. It's at the discretion of council. I have to have a majority vote to give me that. And you mentioned all the flexibility within it already. They can require more land, less land, a little more houses, larger lot. I don't like the quality of this, I don't like the quality of that. It's a discussion. All of us in the town vote for the 5 people that are up there. They get to use their discretion on allowing someone to have a cluster or not. So if we don't like the cluster, we vote for the people who don't like the cluster, and then my application is denied. This is costing our town a lot of money. Hours of our own personal time for something that they can already say no to. Why are we spending the money? Why are our tax dollars going to meetings and reports and staff and work sessions? It's already there for them to say no if they don't like it, and we vote for them. So I just don't understand why we're even talking about it.
Well, the reason why we're having this discussion is because we had a master plan, and when we review master plans, we've always had resident-led committees to see what kind of concepts we can have to make things better for our town. The residents didn't have any say-so in this. Developers did not want to build according to the master plan, so they let them write this themselves. And we were told this is the way it's going to be. When, if we had done it the right way to begin with, our residents here could have provided all that information, the people who already know what we're trying to accomplish here, and written that criteria into the ordinance. But the ordinance just said, here it is, this is what the developers want, this is what we're going to do. And they're not, that's basically, Bobby.
In 2013, you think I wrote it? I didn't write this in 2013.
So we didn't have, okay, excuse me. Okay, guys, I don't know what's going on with you. You used to let me talk. You're not letting me talk
I'm
now.
letting you talk,
That's
but-
telling me something really big. We've always gotten along. Why are you doing this now? Okay?
simply telling you.
All right. So anyway, we've always had a resident-led master plan update. We have lots of public meetings. We have a lot of smart people in this town. People who live here, they have backgrounds in engineering and planning, and they donate their times. And we've always had an open review for this to present something to the community for a vote. We didn't get that. I watched the meetings where the town council said nobody wants to build according to the master plan, but they're ready to go forward with something that we don't allow yet. So this is what we're going to do. So what the residents got was a rollout saying, this is what we're going to do. It allows us to bypass the public hearing, whether we want to approve the project or not. It removed that ability from us to have a say-so in that. So I think our residents could do a really good job for our community. Knowing all the standards, knowing what we want, because we didn't have much of an impact on this.
I agree with some of what you said, but we did have some input. You know, we were able to talk to, no, I remember vividly talking about, if you do 1.6, they're gonna come in, they're gonna divide the acres by 1.6, and that's how many lots are gonna be there. I remember talking about it. But then it came. I am in favor of a cluster development. I've said that many times. It's just gotta be done properly. And the reason it's coming up is we're beginning to see more that are coming with, you know, multiple rooftops. It's kind of like a Plano in the middle of the conservation district. And that's what we're trying to avoid. And so I think the town, they didn't have a big commission like we did in 2000. We didn't have one like we did, that I was part of in 2006 when they did the 2013. It was much smaller, much less input, done much quicker. I agree with all that, but it was done that way.
Lexi, may I have one more bite of the apple? And to address some of these comments, which is what brought to mind, this lady was talking about the air quality. On my phone, I have IQ Air. It's a free app. Most days, Flatiron has worse air than Los Angeles. We're talking about, trees, boy, trees are air filters, trees are produce oxygen, that's true. But we're also talking about 2 cars per household. We're talking about more density, more traffic. About the rooftops and the concrete and those kind of things and responsible development, we're in the vineyard. The mud and dirt and silt is rolling in from Monteleon and from Pepper Creek, and our game trails right now today are plugged. And I've got a meeting with Matt Woods. We're going to work on that and talk about that and everything. But responsible development, we'd like to see that. The last thing I want to say, whoa, horse. You know, we haven't seen the big rains in 4 or 5 years. The development we've had in the last 4 or 5 years, we don't know what's going to happen when the big rains come and we get, on soil, we get 2 inches per hour of absorption. On rooftops and roads and driveways, we get 0 absorption. Are we going to have a river running through here or this basin down to the Grapevine Lake? Hey, let's stop, see what happens, see what is the result of the developments that we have, and then let's go horsey. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to respond to the fact that, you know, the reason why we're here is because I think that, you know, we all have a voice. The reason why the zoning process has public hearing and public sentiments is because when it comes to zoning and planning, it really affects the community. It affects everybody who lives in the community. I'm pretty sure that there are folks who are in favor of developments, and there are going to be folks that are against it. So I think that it is our responsibility. If we live here, we're the residents here, it's our responsibility to voice out our sentiments. And I think that the town has done a great job. They're taking our sentiments into consideration when they're looking at the plans. And so I just want to say that, we're here not because, that yes, there are individuals who are representing us that will be able to vote for the applications, but it doesn't mean that we individually cannot voice out our sentiments. And then also what I wanted to ask is that, what this gentleman just talked about you, dawned on me is that, I know that we have done traffic study, we have done different studies prior to the development. Do we have any standard, like after development, do we have any standard about like doing traffic study after developments? Or anything like that? So I thought that was a great point where, what can we do? Like if there are going to be developments, right? It's inevitable, we know that. But if we want to do it right, then how do we do it right? Do we have before and after study? Or is it just happen before and then we'll afterward, okay, well, let's go to the next project. So I think that those are things that we would like to know.
So the town they'll do a traffic study for the next development, which basically will then factor in any traffic that was added from the previous development. So we can't really go back and do a traffic study. I mean, we could do a traffic study to better understand the area, but we can't, after development's been built, be like, oh, you generated more traffic than we thought, we're gonna knock down some of your houses. You know, that was too many, it turns out. So we can't do that, but we do definitely, you know, once that neighborhood is built, then that's factored into the next study, so that we're not underrepresenting, so that as new developments come forward, it's always keeping tabs on not just kind of what we thought it was gonna be, but also what we're seeing on the ground. We actually do traffic
So
counts.
it's actually harder for the next person to do
It is harder for the next person because they have to contend with the traffic that's been created by the last person.
Alexis, you may have the microphone. Thank you.
And one thing to your point there, the town requires the developer to pay for the town designated engineer to do the traffic studies. So it's based upon the variables that the town puts in place for the developer to actually come in and do the traffic study. Where's Gerald? Gerald left. Gerald had back in 2013 when the town did have a review of this, there were these meetings going on. Some of the very same people that are in the room right now were here. And it did go on. It did go on as long as the 2000 and 2006 review. But it was a situation where council looked at this. I believe we had 33 meetings. I think that's the number that sticks in my head. But one of the things I wanted to point out was the conservation, the conservatorship, or the Conmera was mentioned earlier. One of the developments here in town that has an area that is off limits for residents of Flower Mound is the sanctuary. It's not in Cross Timbers Conservation Development District. It was not on that list because it's outside of the Cross Timbers Development District. And in that, Toll Brothers did develop that, but there's a large block of land that's not allowed for you or me or anyone to trespass on or set foot on without the approval of Conmera, and they will not give you permission. It is at the intersection of Old Settlers, Cross Timbers, just south of these schools, of Old Settlers and McCamey. So if you know, it's on the east side of the sanctuary. So back in 2013, when we were talking about this, you take, let's say that screen up there is all of the Cross Timbers Conservation Development District. And if you use our current zoning, which is basically 2 acres, or you got 2 acre lots, or one residential lot for 2 acres, you could do that as a checkerboard and do that across the board. Obviously, there's got to be streets, there's got to be things that the developer puts in there. Well, right there. There. Let's leave it at that last one. So you see that checkerboard? So if it's straight zoning, each one of those green squares would be a lot. Now, keep in mind, there have to be streets and infrastructure in there to be able to allow people to get in and out of the property. But let's say that half of that is going to be an open space and it's managed by Conmera. But if you can't enjoy that, if you can't walk through there, if you can't take strolls, you can't have picnics, if you can't enjoy it, what value does that have to Flower Mound residents? Sure, you can fly a drone over and you can look down and say that's a big piece of property that no one can ever touch. But you and me, and living in Flower Mound, we can't enjoy that. So in the cluster development and the conservation development, if we have situations where the town does have to approve it, it can be something that we can all enjoy. It can be something that the deer and the animals could traverse from point A to point B across it. But it's also something that we can enjoy as a family. It's also something we as residents can enjoy and walk into and not say we can never trespass on that property, because they can. And I believe they have made it very clear to the town that your residents are not allowed on that property. And that has always really bothered me back from when that happened. Toll Brothers actually wanted to develop it a little bit different, where we give the residents influence in the development and outside the development a more user-friendly area to be able to enjoy. And the kids going to and from school have to go completely around that. Sure, there's some animals in there, but we can't even enjoy the animals. We can't go see them because we are prohibited from crossing that boundary, the exterior boundary. Gerald was right, and Marcia
touched on this just a second ago. These type forums are very important to gather information from all different stakeholders in this. So definitely stay involved. Definitely let your feelings and your intellect be known in this, where council can make the right decision on what's best. We've had a lot of these, and we do have, in our code, we do have situations where the master plan is to be reviewed. Council has the ability to either say, we're going to take a laser focus on which components of the master plan we're going to look at, or we're going to take up a lot of time and do a comprehensive review of that. We haven't had a comprehensive review in a long time. And so some of the questions here tonight was, why are we doing this? I can't answer that question, I'm no longer on council. But in these situations, it's very important for you to get with your neighbors and make sure that they know stuff that's going on. Go out here, there's a lot of stuff on social media that is absolutely wrong. And for those people who have been involved for 20 years on serving the community and up there on boards and commissions, it's irritating that stuff is wrong. Call the town, ask the professional staff, and ask them for the answer. Don't go online and ask on Facebook or whatever forum is what's the answer, because 99% of the time you're going to get the wrong information. So call the professionals, get the information, come to these meetings, let your voice be known, and that way we can all get something we're proud of.
If you're concerned about air quality, do not live near a major airport. Airplanes and jet engines are one of the worst emitters of air pollutants. Cars have come a much long way in being much greener than they have been in many years. You can't live in the flight pattern of a major airport and still wonder about if your air is clean or not. I'm not saying our air is dirty. I'm just saying you can't be near a major airport and expect clean air. So you have to keep, when you buy a home or live near a major airport, you have to keep that in mind. You can't have it both ways.
May I say something about that? I'm sorry. I'm such a pain. When I lived in South Lake, and I was part of the DFW development, I did consulting on some of the terminals, including the international terminal. And there's a cone of takeoff of aircraft. Aircraft are very dirty. Aircraft carrier signals is diesel. You have particulate matter M2.5 and 10. And 2.5 gets in your bloodstream, and 10 sits in your lungs. I could go out and wipe off my car, and it'll have carbon black on it. Some of it's from the aircraft. We, as a community, we've got a pilot, or maybe you left, okay, can ask to have the patterns changed and give them a reason and show them the reason. The other areas, so that can be addressed, and we'll work on that. The other thing is the coal trains, taking the coal from Montana down to Houston and to the ports, and the coal blowing off of those trains open top, and the carbon from that. There's no emissions restrictions. The older diesel trucks are very dirty, and the owners and drivers like them because they don't have the emissions equipment. Cars are much cleaner. Cars are going more towards clean. We have an air quality problem here. If you look at Justin, they don't have it. Just west of us, the air moves from west to east. What is it about I-35, 377, okay, the aircraft, the trains, the trucks, can we do something about it? Yes, we can do something about it, and we're going to do something about it. But right now, we have a problem. Thank you.
Other questions, comments?
I'll be more brief. Two things. One, I just wanted to say from somebody's comment earlier that post oaks, you can't transplant a post oak. You can't go to a nursery and buy a baby post oak and put it in and raise it. When the post oaks are cut down, the post oak region begins to be decimated of the post oaks. Now I'm trying to grow some post oaks that came up by themselves, and they're very slow. Anyway, I just wanted to say, when a post oak is gone, it's really hard to. yes, you can plant other trees and they can grow, but we're probably gonna not replenish the post oaks, that's one. And the other is a question, if the town has looked at the impact of the lakeside development, the Riverwalk development, the apartments on the other side of 2499, on that corridor. I mean, there's a lot of density of housing going in, which is bringing in more cars. I get what everybody just said about the planes, and I'm not saying that the cars are the single source, but I'm curious if we are being surrounded by much more dense development and apartment complexes. I just want to make sure that's also taken into account instead of, it's not like we're just country with nothing around us and we're just talking about housing developments. There are, certainly we're having the impact of what's already happening. Thank you.
Yes, and so the town definitely does take all those developments that have been approved into consideration. So they're all built into models that we have set up with Kimley Horn, and so we do take that into consideration in future analysis.
Can I ask you one more thing? Can you just define Conmera? Because I don't know that the man here spoke about it.
It's a nonprofit organization that serves as a land trust, and so it's the specific one, I guess, that, we talked about how for agricultural conservation developments, per the ordinance language, you can't just donate your open space to the town, or you can't have it maintained by the HOA. It has to be maintained by a nonprofit land trust organization, and so that's just a specific one.
Okay.
Connemara no longer holds those trusts. Texas Land Conservancy holds the trust now. Connemara just turned them over to Texas Land Conservancy. Yeah, they're a nonprofit that conservation trust. They go in once a year to check and make sure things are being managed the way they're supposed to be managed, that, somebody didn't suddenly build something or plant non-native plants or, do something they're not supposed to in that conservation area.
The Corps of Engineers?
Pardon? They're not the Corps of Engineers. It's a separate, it's called, you can look it up, it's Texas Land Conservancy, and if you go to their website, they explain a lot about what a land conservancy trust is.
Donna, maybe you could help, or Leslie, is there any limitation to adding more land to the Texas Land Conservatory, or will they?
No, although the gentleman who talked about Cummings, there really isn't something to preserve there. I'm sorry, it's a pasture land. There are very few trees actually on that land, and I think that a conservation trust might have a hard time justifying, protecting pasture land unless something was done, like we're going to restore it to prairie, or we're going to, something like that. So yeah, there are some limitations, I think.
So tree farms and things like tree farms, agricultural interests could be developed on those?
No, correct.
Questions, comments? All right. Well, staff will be around until, for another 30 minutes or so, until 8. If anybody has any questions, you'd like to talk to us directly, we'll be here. And I appreciate everybody coming out. If you didn't already, put a sticker on my board so I know how you found out about the meeting tonight, because we want to know what works so that we know how to reach people. And thank you all for your input.